U.S. government agencies are taking concerted steps to implement a zero trust architecture to protect critical systems and data. Those include meeting a number of cybersecurity standards and objectives by the end of fiscal year 2024. I'm Wyatt Cash with Scoop News Group, and here to talk about that effort at the Department of Homeland Security's U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services is Shane Barney, Chief Information Security Officer. Shane, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Shane, before we start, give us a sense of the scope of USCIS's responsibilities and the IT operations that support those.
Sure, happy to. So USCIS its mission is to support the legal immigration process. So we're sort of the people who process immigration requests. That might be a work permit, that might be citizenship, or we also support the refugee and asylum processes as well. So obviously there's always a little politics wrapped around those topics, as I'm sure everyone's aware. And so we tend to stay in the middle of things quite a bit, and it makes for a very active and kind of a fun agency to work for. It's a great mission to support. But in terms of the IT operations, obviously the immigration process, for those who aren't aware, has primarily in the past been a paper process, heavily paper process, and I can't even begin to put words around how much paper we're talking about. Just active records alone, you're looking at 165 million paper files. And these files can be several banker boxes large. So very, very, very heavy paper. Obviously, something that would be, of interest for us would always have been digitalization and actually moving towards more of an e-based, sort of electronic-based immigration process. So we've had a heavy emphasis on that and have so for a number of years. And this drove sort of our requirements to go to the cloud. And so as a federal agency, we moved very quickly into the cloud early on, probably sooner than anyone else. First to really leverage agile development processes. And so jump forward 10 years or so, and now I'm an agency that's 95% cloud-based. It's very normal for us to do several major deployments in a single day. We're using our agile and sort of developed DevOps methodologies. And we're very tip of the spear, sort of forward-leaning organization because of that. So, and in terms of support, I mean, not only do we have 28,000 or so plus employees internally, we also have to support the broader, world, and I do mean the world because we support people who are not just citizens of the United States. And on an average month, that you're looking at 16 million plus accounts that somehow we're managing via our public-facing systems. So it's a very dynamic environment to work in.
Sounds like it. Well, as CISO, talk to us a little about what are your top priorities in the next year over the short term, let's say, and maybe a little longer term, maybe over the next 3 years, when it comes to meeting the federal zero trust security requirements.
Interestingly enough, we actually started on our zero trust journey many years ago, primarily because we were in the cloud. We recognized the value of cloud. And we recognized what we could do with cloud that would later become more known as zero trust. We just called it good cyber hygiene. But we really were pushing our in that direction. So we started implementing a number of things ahead of the EO, without realizing we were going to eventually meet this EO. So we were further along, I think, than most agencies. We'd already deployed a secrets management solution. We'd gotten a good lockdown on at least the initial kind of asset and inventory piece. We had deployed single sign-on across our agency. We have complete 100% role-based access for all of our systems. So we'd really done a number of things. So you'd think, oh, well, hey, we're almost done. And yeah, we're not even close. So in terms of short-term goals, really what we're focusing on right now, and I'll start with just asset inventory alone. A lot of times we talk just about users and the importance of users. And yes, users are an important part, but honestly, the asset part is far more difficult to deal with. You've got to when they talk about asset inventory, what that really talks about is the entire life cycle of an asset and where it lives in your environment, how it operates, where it operates, what's allowed to connect to and be authorized to do, who's allowed to access it, and when are they allowed to access it, what kind of data can transit it and live on it. All these sorts of things have to be dealt with as part of your inventory asset. You've got to be able to onboard and offboard it and control that entire process to within an nth degree. And you've got to know when things aren't yours. I can't state that enough. You shouldn't be able to plug something into your environment and not know what it is. That's a really just a bare bones basic requirement for anything you're going to do in zero trust. So we're really finite. We did a really great job of doing the inventory. Now we're really working on getting a really good fine control over that so that we have that onboarding and offboarding process in place. We hope to have that finished up this next fiscal year. We're also heavily, obviously, as far as we are with single sign-on, we're not perfect. There's definitely things I need to do. One of the big hurdles that we're going to overcome here, I think by December actually, is deploying our first as a public-facing identity provider. If you're doing true zero trust modeling, you're going to get rid of your parameters, and you're going to have a public-facing way of which you interface and identify and control your identities. That is an IDP, an identity provider. There are a number of solutions out there that do this. A number of vendors have tried it. USCIS is, given kind of how we operate, we decided to build our own. But getting that in place these are all just basic building blocks of things that we have to have in order for us to really progress to those next levels. Now, fortunately for me, we've done other things that is going to help us, so we don't kind of have to do those. On the user side, we've already deployed, a solution for doing password vaulting. We've got just-in-time for authentication for our administrators. We also have developed a virtualized POV, a privileged access workstation. So we've got a lot of those components in place, which kind of puts us further along that paradigm. But that said, we still have some progress we need to make, especially for users, how we transfer internally and how we do inventory of our users and kind of maintain that user base is really challenging. I think longer term, we're really going to be focusing in on our data. For me, defining the authorizations, the conditions, the entitlements to access data represents probably 85% of the effort for zero trust. It is going to be the biggest focal point for us moving forward.
Appreciate that. And, one of the things that as we talk to CISOs that it sounds like still a struggle is how to implement zero trust across multiple networks, multiple domains, multiple departments, and functional silos. What's your plan, or how are you approaching this ability to implement zero trust across these various domains?
So that's kind of, it's interesting you say that. That's actually something we faced. When we were making a transition between cloud and prem, we were exactly that. We had a foot in both environments. We were trying to straddle both. We had identity providers in both environments. They didn't always necessarily talk very well. Our roles were not really well controlled. Our first, really, one of the first things I did as a CISO, one of the things I'm very fortunate is I own the ICAM program. Not all CISOs do. And because of that, I was able to sort of like, hey, we're gonna fix this. Like we can fix this. We not only have the capabilities to fix it, we have the technology stack to do it. We have a security reason to do that. And so, in one of the solutions, or the way we did that, is we really began centralizing how we did that. There's lots of ways you can do that. As a CISO, I can always wave the magic ATO, hammer and threaten your ATO, and not going to authorize your system to operate if you don't do these things. That's always there. But we found we took a different approach. I refer to it as the easy button solution, where we actually provided a service to the dev teams where we said, listen, we're going to accept all the responsibility for building these modules, these interfaces, these API gateways for you to leverage for doing identity and role access. All you have to do is point your devices our way, and we will take care of the rest. They were a little skeptical at first because dev teams love to do things themselves. But you know what? When they were able to offload that capability, that easy button approach sort of just drove it by itself. It's been the sort of, once we kind of realize, I would love to say we were just being that forward thinking. We weren't. It was just the way we approached it. But the minute we realized how successful it was, we began applying it in other areas. And so roles were the exact same way. We did the exact same process. And now if I even begin to threaten to remove something, they'll come forward and fund it or offer to help us do something, because the service to them is so valuable that it's worth them helping us keep it alive. So when we deployed our secrets management solution, we did the same thing. We provided it just was an easy button solution, and they just wanted to do it. And one of the other short-term goals we're working on, actually, I should have mentioned it, was our certificate management and automating that. That actually was the easiest sell of them all, because all teams hate dealing with certificates, and they are the basis by which you're going to do identification and role-based access for your devices. So getting our handle on that and automating that and removing that responsibility from the dev teams and from our engineering teams has just been the biggest win for us. We can't move fast enough. So for my approach is always taking that easy button approach, providing services as a security organization that going to encourage them to move in that direction.
Well, I suspect more agencies may be wanting to give you a call about how to get that easy
I get
button.
quite a few, actually. You'd be surprised.
Well, let me talk about another area of concern, and that's about the long-standing requirements in government for compliance requirements. FISMA obviously comes to mind, and OMB just recently put out a new memo about kind of certifying software that everyone's using. Talk to us a little bit about what concerns do you have about meeting federal zero trust adoption and still falling in line with these longer standing compliance requirements.
So there's sometimes, in my line of work, sometimes we will view, the security sort of compliance, check the box security approaches is not necessarily in parallel with good security practice. And I would be lying if I said that's not sometimes the case. Sometimes we're checking boxes on things that absolutely make no sense whatsoever from a security perspective, but we're required to do it because someone says we have to do it. And I do have some concerns wrapped around that. I mean, we want I think everybody in the federal space, state and locals as well, they want to secure their enterprises. Nobody wants to be on the Washington Post front page and because your agency got owned because you weren't doing good practices. That all being said, those audits are very costly for us to conduct. They require a lot of resources on our side. There's a lot of back and forth. Sometimes the people who are conducting the audits don't have quite the technological understanding of our environment that we do, so they don't always understand our responses very well. It's a lot of work. But we're trying to be a little prescriptive. That, I mean, the nice thing about having like these executive memos, as well as the stuff coming from OMB, is that gives us a framework for we know what's going to be audited. We know what they're going to come after and ask us for. And so part of our planning efforts has always been keeping that in the back of our minds so we know how to respond to those appropriately and provide them the information they need. I don't see anything, as a federal agency, I'm okay with compliance. Compliance is how we ensure that we are, spending the public's money in the appropriate ways. It provides good transparency. I have no issues with that. Big fan, big supporter. I think it should happen. My big worry is when compliance gets in the way of good security, and we have to make sure we seek a good balance on that. I will say that, almost without fail, there's been good dialogue on a lot of these things coming out. We've been surprised by a few things here and there, but generally speaking, we've had good dialogue with them, so we have some input of what they're asking for. Because I want to, if they're going to, obviously the audits are going to happen, I want them to be of as much value as possible, so that when they come out, I can use that as a tool to either request additional resources or new budgeting or a new technology that we need to get in place because we're not meeting some requirement. What I don't want to do is have to do that for something that doesn't really add to the overall security of my enterprise.
Makes a lot of sense. And then lastly, Shane, there's obviously this is a long journey to get to zero trust, and there's a lot of focus around the 5 pillars within the civilian arena, 7 if you look at defense, around the user and devices, et cetera. But the other issue is around getting automation and orchestration in place across those. How is your department? How are you looking at bringing a unity of automation and orchestration across all 5 pillars of zero trust?
Actually, if you don't have security if you don't have security automation and orchestration in place, you probably shouldn't bother to do zero trust. It is the linchpin that binds it all together and makes it possible. We started doing the security automation, 2018 maybe, a little earlier, maybe 2017, something like that. Primarily because we were trying to solve a problem we had with cloud. Cloud is wonderful in a lot of different ways, but it generates a tremendous amount of data, more data than my SOC could ever hope to go through or even begin to go through. So automation became our friend. It became the way in which we dealt with that. And so kind of use the word failed, but we sort of failed at how we did it for the first couple of years, but we learned a lot. We learned a lot about how not to do it. But then we got really good. And we start tracking how many automations we were doing and how much those automations were actually causing or how much they were saving the agency in terms of actual funding, because we could tie a labor hour to each of those automations. And I think the first year that we really were successful at it, it was like maybe $300,000 or something. We thought that was the greatest thing since sliced bread. We thought that was amazing. Last fiscal year, I think we did 27 million. So, we were heavily invested in security automation. We've been doing it for a number of years. We lead the department, DHS as the Center of Excellence for Automation and how that's done. And we've been big players in that space. So for me, doing automation, we were doing this as part of our overall cyber hygiene strategy and our overall, like, just how we approach cybersecurity. It was already in place. When I look at how zero trust is handled, the level, because really a lot of this stuff is done at a transaction level. So you're talking about transactions between users and different assets and different data sets and how that's all happening. And then you're making a number of assessments along the way. The only way that's ever going to happen is via automation. There's no human being on the planet. There's not enough resources on the planet for you to have eyes on glass to do that. So you've really, agencies have to invest in this and have to invest in it early on, because, like I said, it takes a while to get the knack of it. And it's a very different approach to how you do security. It changes the entire your entire makeup of your security program, right down to what kind of workforce you have and the type of training you're providing. So, for agencies, I've always said, my recommendation to any agency is get invested in security automation now, and don't wait. Don't make that one of the last things you do. Make it the first thing you do. Because it's so much easier to add in the pieces of the puzzles as you go along into that automation kind of platform than it is to retrofit it in.
Well, that sounds like some great advice. Well, Shane, Barney, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to share your insights on your journey to zero trust. And it sounds like you're doing a lot of innovative things that other agencies could learn from. So thank you for sharing all that you're doing there.
Absolutely happy to do so. Thank you.